from our morning of talks. Holly is an engineer by training and a science policy advocate by passion. She co-founded the National Science Policy Network and the Commonwealth of Virginia Engineering and Science Policy Fellowship, and is currently the managing director of the National Science Foundation Engineering Research Center for the Internet of Things for Precision Agriculture at the University of Pennsylvania. Most recently, she has served as the 2020 to 2022 American Institute of Physics Science and Technology Policy Fellow at the U.S. Department of State's Office of Agricultural Policy. She received her PhD in Chemical and Environmental Engineering with a designated emphasis in public policy from the University of California, Riverside in 2018. While there, she founded their Science to Policy program and contributed to several California state advisory committees, and has also worked for the California Council on Science and Technology. So, Holly, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Tara, and thanks to the Penn State group for inviting me, and to Tara and Angela, especially for all of the coordination I know it takes to get everybody here. So thank you guys so much. And I'm really honored to be the keynote and to follow that amazing talk. There's been so many relevant things that have come up today already that I'm excited to get to reference. Because my path has really been a food systems path. It's in the P's here, but my dissertation research was really on food safety and foodborne pathogens. I worked in policy for a bit, as Tara said, and recently I've been brought back to Pennsylvania and want to talk a little bit about some emerging projects here. So, and maybe after that inspiring presentation from Mayton, I'll add to protein next time you see me, who knows? So that was great. A little, I guess, title correction from the agenda is that I am no longer actually an official staff member at NSPN. We've had some wonderful support and have been able to hire full-time staff, full-time managing director now. So I'm co-founder, but observing from the outside. But looking forward to reporting on what they've been up to. And I'm the managing director for IoT Frag, as Tara said. So one thing maybe you've learned if you've done any science policy training is the importance of putting the bottom line up front. And so I'm going to do that by telling you the main thing I'm hoping you're going to take away from this presentation today is that there is no one way to do science policy. And especially in the last few years, there's been an emergence of many opportunities, no matter what role you're in, to be engaged in science policy. And I think that broadening our view of what that means is important for us to really shift the culture of what it means to be a scientist or an engineer engaged in policy, whether it's part-time, full-time, locally, internationally, within your university or within your community. There's so many ways. So just want to emphasize that, and I'll talk about lots of the little things that I've done along the way and hope that some of them will inspire some of you. But my main tips start today. Someone once told me when I was a grad student, I had to wait until I had tenure and I was a scientific expert to be able to have input on policy. That's absolutely not true. Start today, don't let anybody tell you otherwise. Build a network. We named NSPN the National Science Policy Network for a reason. So much of what gets done in science policy is by working in interdisciplinary teams and knowing who to call when you have a question. So build your network today, raise your hand to do new things, and stay humble. I'm going to emphasize this, that a lot of scientists and engineers approach policy with the mindset that policymakers just need to hear the facts. They just need to hear science, and that'll make them make better decisions. There's a lot of factors that go into policy making. Hopefully lots of you know that. So definitely approach science policy with humility throughout your career and do it in a way that inspires you. And like I said, I actually had to miss Andy's talk this morning, but hopefully he touched on this classic upside down triangle, right? We're used to communicating with our main point at the end as researchers. But like I just said, it's really important that you put the bottom line up front when you're thinking about communicating in different audiences. And I even adopted this in my dissertation defense presentation. So I think it's useful in the research environment too. So just a little tip. So the first section of my talk, I'm going to talk about my path a little bit and how, as someone trained as an engineer, really interested in sustainability like Nathan, and getting interested in public policy, how I've navigated that intersection, and in particular, how it relates to food systems really broadly. So before I jump into that, I'm not going to go through all the different places I've worked and places I've been affiliated, but I just show this to really emphasize that there is no one path that's going to take you to science policy at the end. And there's ways to be engaged in all different roles. You'll see that while I was being trained as a chemical engineer, I took a slight deviation. I almost became a farmer briefly before moving to California for graduate school. And that's really been something that has inspired me in all the work that I've done since then. And you see that I keep coming back to engineering schools and engineering programs for some reason. So fellow engineers here, let's definitely chat. So something I've noticed and I'm kind of interested in exploring more in my career is this intersection between engineering, sustainability, and policy. And if you think about it, these two things are really complementary. They're all inspired by helping people and improving society. But the priorities of these three fields are actually sort of in conflict, right? So as engineers, this again relates to something we just heard, are really prioritizing doing things more efficiently, right? Less resources, more output. That's the traditional engineer approach. For sustainability, we're really thinking about how are we improving things for the long term, right? Regardless of potentially how efficient they are along the way, right? They go hand in hand. And then lastly, for public policy, how are we helping the whole of society, right? No one individual, no one company. But doing all these three things together can be a challenge, right? And I think that's why it's so important to have interdisciplinary teams and to train scientists and engineers to think really broadly about our work and to feel like we're obligated to do so. And so my kind of first real experience with this intersection was in Southern California. Has anyone here heard of the Salton Sea? It's a very, it's not a very well-known location because it's a drying up lake, but it is still the biggest lake in California. It's 35 miles long. It's just south of where I went to graduate school in Riverside, California. And it's a really fascinating case study of environmental justice and science policy because the lake in its current form was actually created by an engineering accident. They were trying to divert water from the Colorado River to provide it to agriculture in the region. Essentially, one of the dams broke and it flooded this big basin for essentially a whole year. And it created this beautiful freshwater lake that became an oasis in the desert. But of course, sustaining that lake was virtually impossible. It was really fed for a while by agricultural runoff, but it has no natural inlet now that they've fixed that break in the dam. And so it started to recede, started to get saltier. There's a lot of toxins in there from decades of agricultural runoff. And there's a lot of environmental justice issues in that community as air quality worsens from the dust and things that are kicked up from this. So while I was in grad school, one of the things I did with a team was start a myth-busting blog, essentially, because there's a lot of misinformation about the Salton Sea out there. Most people, even if you've heard of it, have never been there because it's a really remote part of the desert. So that sort of led us into this space, and because of that blog and the readership we were getting, several of us were invited to participate in some of the state's policy efforts related to scientific advising, to public outreach on what they were going to do about the Salton Sea in the future. So I'm happy to talk more about that later, but that sort of is what exposed me to state policy making for the first time and connected me to organizations like the California Council on Science and Technology. And you've heard about CCST before. They run the State Policy Fellowship for California, but they're also a standalone nonprofit that provides nonpartisan guidance to the state government on really any science and tech issues that they think are important. And so one of those at the time was related to the passage of the Open and Transparent Water Data Act. And so I kind of raised my hand to help as CCST was trying to decide what they were going to do. And so I worked part-time for them while I was a grad student, essentially assessing what all the different stakeholders in California's water ecosystem thought we should be doing to manage the data better. As you can imagine, it's quite a contentious political issue in the state of California. And so we sort of published our results and presented them. And there's been a lot of work putting data. So we did this work in 2016 maybe, and just last month they finally released an actual final product of putting data to work. So it's been a long road, and we still have a lot of ways to go. But it was a great experience for me to start networking, to start seeing and showing how my skills are related to policy, and also to get published in the Journal of Water Policy. And I was able to ultimately include this in my dissertation as sort of a policy chapter. So highly encourage folks to think about ways to do that. So turning to my actual streams of research, which was partially related to water, but was really investigating how water quality was going to impact the safe transport of food pathogens in our agricultural systems. So I specifically looked at how E. coli and salmonella cells would stick to leafy greens in different environments. And there was a lot of policy aspects to this that I had observed, again, having worked on farms actually, because there's sort of a conflict between we want to have more sustainable agriculture, which means, for example, using more organic compost and fertilizer that can come from manure, potentially bring in new pathogens, right? And we want to reduce our water use, right? So those things get more concentrated in the system. So how do we approach this, create policies that are going to help us both improve the environmental impacts of agriculture, but then minimize food safety risks along the way? So as part of this, I started getting involved in another California initiative, the Global Food Initiative, a different GFI. And so through that fellow, before I get into that, I do want to say a little more about why I'm so interested in food, and the food policy talk just now is so relevant, but the nature of conflicts in food systems is just really fascinating to me. So often food is what brings us together. You know, we'll all come together over lunch shortly after I get through this talk. But at the same time, food is so often what divides us, right? Whether it's something sort of trivial, like does pineapple belong on pizza, but also more complicated things like should we cultivate our meat? Should we genetically modify our crops, right? So it's people, everyone has a strong opinion about food in a lot of ways. And then at the same time, like we just heard on some of the questions here, right? Food is a very global system now. We have a very globalized food trade world. At the same time, everybody really wants to buy fresh and buy local. Whatever we can produce here, there's a big emphasis on local and regional food systems. And sustainability requires both of these things being in place, and also addressing security issues like Ed, you talked about earlier. So then jumping to what I was going to say, so part of my interest in food led me to apply for this fellowship program with the Global Food Initiative that essentially helps grad students get paired up with different international development organizations to do short-term projects. And so I was really lucky to have to go spend a summer in Vietnam during my graduate school and work with this interdisciplinary team of California grad students to do this assessment of what it means to have a sustainable diet in Vietnam. And it was really incredible. We got to do a lot of interviews with both scientists and policy experts in Vietnam and facilitate a lot of really great discussion, and again, publish our work in teams, grow my network, and learn a little bit about science diplomacy along the way. And so here's just a picture of sort of the product of that work, which is this sort of framework for how we consider or assess sustainable diets or sustainable food systems. There's lots of things in the literature that are attempting to sort of more systematically look at this. It's just our contribution to that field. But it helps you kind of understand what I mean when I'm saying food systems, right? I'm talking about everything from the actual food value chains to those indirect and broader impacts. But again, I keep coming back to food safety. That was my research area. And that's what led me to kind of my next opportunity, which was as a postdoc back at the University of Virginia, where I did my undergrad. And I had the opportunity to join this startup-funded research program there for a year. And it was a real opportunity to explore a lot of new opportunities and skills that were really related to policy in unexpected ways to me. I got to really dig into intellectual property and patent complications. We applied for our patents. We explored different stakeholders for a technology we're developing. It was an enzyme that was going to help food safety additives be more effective in an organic way. And so this stakeholder assessment process is a really important thing to learn in policy as well as in startups. And then, of course, to identify the actual policy barriers to implementing the product we had in mind. And so I just want to emphasize that whether you're doing a job that has science policy in the title or not, right, there are ways that you can still be doing science policy. So keep that in mind. So before I go any further, I guess I want to pause and sort of pivot here, because along the way, as I've been doing all of this science and some side policy projects, I was also working with student groups like the Penn State group and starting my group at UC Riverside, and seeing that there were a lot of gaps between getting early career scientists engaged in policy in meaningful ways. And so we really started thinking about what we could do as a coalition to fill those gaps. So if you sort of think back, put yourself in the mindset of 2016, right? This is the era of sort of alternative facts and fake news and a lot of, you know, galvanization of the scientific community to sort of start being advocates in a way that I think there hadn't been for a while at least. So just you know, pictures here, alternative facts. This one's kind of funny, I think. That's a common thing in the engineering community, right? It's like, I don't want to go out there, but sometimes they can. You know, we had the March for Science, right? I don't know if any of you were a part of that, but they had, I think, 230 marches across the world in 2016. There was a real movement that I was a part of, that I think many of you probably felt like you were a part of, and it was an opportunity for us to come together and try to capitalize on that energy. And so a few of us who had just met at a AAAS, to the Advancement of Science, their annual meeting, we were all running student groups, just like the Penn State group, and decided to form a coalition to try to get some money and see what we could do to sustain our connections and magnify our collective impact. And so we did this very informal survey of, I think, like 30 groups like ours to say, what are your main barriers, right? What could a network do to serve you better? No surprise, grad students are limited by time and money, right? As many people are, but especially graduate students. And part of the issue at this time was, again, that people saw the path to science policy as going to DC, moving to DC, committing a year or two to a position. And so we strove to not only provide more grant funding, but also to create opportunities that people could participate in science policy on a short-term basis or on a remote basis. And this was pre-pandemic, so sort of a novel idea at the time. So we got together this sort of regional group with me on the West Coast, Caitlin Warlick-Short in the Midwest. She was with the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Michaela Reichard was in the South at University of Virginia. And Avital Percher was in New York at Rockefeller University. And so 4 of us were able to sort of use our regional networks of groups like the Penn State group and create what became the National Science Policy Network, and become a full formal 501c3 and get some really great startup funding from organizations like the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation and the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative. So just some of our initial goals, just based on that survey and our own experiences, right? For one, we wanted to make sure we could all share resources more effectively, right? A lot of people were reinventing the wheel, hosting Science Policy 101 courses and trying to make them up from scratch. There's so many resources to help you do that. To create opportunities, like I said, remote opportunities, part-time opportunities, to get science policy experience without having to go to DC, and to sustain connections and build solidarity. This is, you know, one of the things we hear most often from NSPA members is that just finding people who are also passionate about science policy when it can feel very isolating potentially on your campus is one of the most valuable things to get out of the network. So very proud of that. And so I'll just put up a few quick slides here to talk about NSPN and where it is today. Like I said, we're a full-fledged 501c3. You can become a member for just $20 a year. They keep the dues very low. But from the website, you can get lots of resources for free as well. So definitely encourage you guys to check it out. The mission statement is really constant and hasn't changed, which is empowering tomorrow's leaders to propel science forward. And that's often done, or we mainly have done that through 3 key pillars that I just mentioned. So building this community, providing training, accessible training for people at all different levels of science policy, and then facilitating engagement, especially for and by early career scientists, right? How are we empowering ourselves and meeting our own needs in science policy? So I want to highlight a few ways folks can get involved, or if you're not a student, that you can encourage others to get involved. Or postdocs, who can be students. Early career, I think, is if you're new to science policy, NSPN considers that early career in science policy. So I would really encourage you to get involved in the Leadership Council. Like I said, NSPN continues to be an organization created by, led by, and serving early career scientists and engineers getting into policy. And so although we do have full-time staff, we also still have this large and robust and very active early career leadership board. So you can run for the national chair and chair-elect positions once you're a member, as well as several leadership positions for different committees or regional parts of the country. So definitely encourage you to check that out. I'm happy to connect you with any of these folks if any of these topics are of interest to you. And then, as I mentioned, we've done a really, I think, a great job over the years creating opportunities for different levels of engagement. And the website now has this really great sort of filter where you can go through the programs and say, do you want sort of a low-level green, just touchstone commitment, or do you want like full-time fellowship, which is the red extreme, right? You want to do it all, and the same for different categories of skills. And so to just feature a few of them, and one of the low effort engagements is things like our HBCU college tour, which is also aligned with part of our mission of diversifying the folks involved in science policy, but also creating opportunities at institutions that tend to have less resources to create chapters like this one. So the HBCU, historically Black colleges and universities, and minority-serving institutions college tour happens every year. And it tends to be sort of a science policy 101 that anyone's able to attend virtually, but is focused on recruitment from these minority institutions. So that's sort of our lowest tier of engagement, getting people involved in just a virtual introductory way. One step up from that, some of you might have participated in this before. This was one of our sort of cornerstone programs when we started, is the science policy writing competition. The opportunity for 2023 just opened. But every year we have an opportunity for early career folks to work together in teams, write on policy topics of interest, and get it published, right? Which is a huge thing to have on your CV and be able to demonstrate as you go forward in your career that you have sort of non-technical writing skills. So highly encourage folks to look into that. And then lastly, sort of my pride and joy is the Science Policy Scholars Program, modeled off of programs like Michigan's certificate. At UC Riverside, we have our certificate program now as well. This is a virtual program that provides a more intensive training in science policy, as well as a paid part-time internship after you do the SciPol Scholars training with a partner organization that you can choose, that NSBN can help you choose or introduce you to. But it's really meant to be a way for people to not only get training, but then start exploring a real science policy role in the job. And we have had folks work at the EPA, at Unit of Concerned Scientists, so nonprofits, at like Lewisburg, which is more of a lobby shop in DC, getting a really unique experience, and everything in between. So really proud of this program. It continues to be really well funded and really in high demand across the NSPA network. So definitely check that out too if you're feeling ready to commit. So good news is NSPA was not alone in taking advantage of this sort of galvanization of young scientists and really all scientists in 2016 and 2018. So I did want to feature, there were quite a few organizations, I'm sure I'm missing some, that were launched during this time period, including 500 Women Scientists, March for Science, which I mentioned, Engineers and Scientists Acting Locally, which is someone we partner with most often and does a lot of volunteer-driven local engagement efforts for scientists, as well as two of the Federation of American Scientists programs that we've worked with, New Voices and the Day One project that was focused on when the next president begins, what science policy issues are we going to have ready to go to hit their desk on day one. So that was a really cool project that a lot of NSPA members got to contribute to as well. So I highly encourage you to check out any and all of these organizations too. And then when I have a question, we think maybe the Penn State Science Policy Group was also formed in 2016. So anyone able to confirm? I wasn't sure if we
All right, it was founded in 2014 and it was originally called the Center for Science Advocacy.
Oh, very cool. So you were a little ahead of your time. That's great. So yes, lots of groups at least. Yeah.
There was like a reinvigoration of it in 2016
okay.
because I was in it at that point in time.
Okay, nice. Awesome, so great. Glad to have you guys in our cohort of rejuvenated, or I think we were actually, NSPN was technically a review of the National Science Policy Group that had been formed maybe 5 years prior. Yes, so wonderful. Definitely check that out. So in thinking about all these different science policy organizations that exist in this ecosystem of science policy, and as I've sort of tried to navigate what role I think I'm best suited for and I feel most filled in this science policy ecosystem, I've started to think of the science policy world on this sort of a circular spectrum, if you will. And thanks to Christine this morning for sort of starting this conversation by pointing out that there's science for policy and policy for science. And so I just wanted to sort of put this together and see if it helps people visualize where they think they want to live or work in the future, as much as it kind of has helped me. So just to orient you here, we've seen the bill now twice today. I love to see that in science policy conferences. On one end, we have practicing scientists. These could be in universities, in the government, all of us, researchers, right? They have a role to play in science policy as well, right? So let's include everybody. Then on the far side, policy practitioners, right? This includes really people in governments, not only making policy, but also implementing policy. And so you don't have to go to that extreme to be doing science policy. However, if you want to run for office, if you want to work in government formally, it's a great opportunity to do that as well and get exposed to that world. So like I said, let's look at the top half of our little arc, our spectrum first, science for policy world. Very open to critiques on where I've placed these organizations on the spectrum. But I just think it's worth noting that those organizations like NSPN, right, that are working with scientists to prepare them better to be impactful in policy. And then there's organizations like Union of Concerned Scientists that does include a lot of scientists, but also a lot of policy professionals that are focused on more advocacy on specific policy issues and helping inform decision-making more directly. And then I would say even closer to that is something like CCST that exists to inform policymakers, right? They engage with a lot of scientists, but they mostly have on their staff policy-minded folks who are really doing that sort of writing and just citing science. And then I put the Congressional Research Service on here as, I think, an example of an organization that is very close to policymakers. It's set up intentionally to provide information to Congress upon request about scientific information and beyond. So I think that's an interesting place to think about if you're really interested in research, but do want to work more directly in policy and serving policymakers. Switching to the bottom half of my spectrum here, the policy for science world. So these are, as Christine said, organizations that are really involved in the governance of the scientific enterprise or how science is done. And so really on the domestic side, of course, the National Science Foundation, organizations like the National Institutes of Health, that fund science and that implement a lot of the policies that govern the way we do science. And then I think sort of getting closer to the scientific side of the spectrum, a lot of what the American Association for the Advancement of Science does is monitoring R&D funding, lobbying and advocating on behalf of increased R&D funding, and connecting scientists to policymakers for that purpose. And then even closer to the science, I'd argue university government relations offices are really working on behalf of active scientists and researchers and are much closer to them, but are indeed advocating for on the policy for science side. And so one of the most well-known avenues to getting into science policy that, again, I want to emphasize, is not the end-all, be-all of science policy. There are lots of ways to do it. However, as we've heard a couple of times today, the American Association for the Advancement of Science Fellowship Program does put PhD and master's engineering level scientists into the federal government in DC for 1 or 2 year terms. And it is a great way to get exposure to a wide variety of types of roles in this world of science policy. And almost more valuable than that sometimes is the network of 50 years of alumni of this program now have access to that are in all kinds of incredible roles within the US government and well beyond. So I was a fellow starting in 2020. I was funded by the American Institute of Physics, and I worked in the State Department's Office of Agriculture Policy. So again, agriculture as my common thread here. So I'll say a little bit about that role. I don't know if anyone's watched Madam Secretary. I love that show. I watched every episode multiple times. So I was, of course, envisioning myself working with the Secretary of State, running around in the fancy office building, discussing national security issues, but it was September of 2020. As we all know, so the reality of my fellowship was mostly sitting on my computer in my home office, and unfortunately did not get to travel the world and attend a lot of conferences. I didn't have to wake up at 3 a.m. fairly often to attend a New Zealand meeting, so pros and cons. But overall, I do want to say it was a wonderful experience and a really unique experience to work in agriculture at a time when sort of the global pandemic was shaping the world. So on top of the uniqueness of it being a global pandemic, it was also a unique time because we were going through a change in the presidential administration. And as a sort of environmental engineer by training, you'll learn if you work in science policy, if you're a scientist, you're all type of scientists probably. They have questions for you related to any type of science. But since people knew I was an environmental scientist, we were allowed to talk about climate change again. I was in a really good position to be able to be helpful and write a lot of memos for people on kind of what the hot topics were related to agriculture and climate change. It was also a great time, and part of why I chose this placement was because the UN Food System Summit was held for the first time shortly after I started. And then I was able to play a leadership role in informing Department of State's policies and approaches, and also coordinating across the US government. You heard earlier how complicated it is to try to get USDA and FDA and so many other players on the same page, right? So that was part of our role in the State Department. So a really wonderful learning experience to work on lots of types of things. And I'm really more than happy to talk about this with others who are interested if you've got questions. But to just round it out to get you to where I am now in my career, there was this issue of digital agriculture that kept coming up while I was in the State Department, and it really started to pique my interest in a lot of ways. So let me just highlight a few. We heard Ed use answer to one of the Q&A questions earlier. It was just on point. The issues of potential cybersecurity threats with the digitalization of agriculture, both in our hardware as well as in what's done with the data, now that we can monitor food potential yields all over the world, are huge. It also overlaps with the equity issues domestically of broadband access, right? If we have technologies that rely on Wi-Fi in the field, right? But a lot of farmers are in rural environments that don't have them. How are we deciding who's going to get access to that first? How are we enabling equitable access to technology, right? This is a Biden-Harris administration priority as well. There's the sort of emergence of this term climate smart agriculture. And also while I was at the State Department, we were able to launch the Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate, which is an international coalition of countries as well as companies and nonprofits and research groups that are focused on enabling sustainable agriculture through technology and catalyzing partnerships and things to do that. So that was a really exciting program that I'm still involved in. And it's again related to digital agriculture as the type of technology that's going to help us achieve that. And then of course, because again, it was a global pandemic and supply chains were a large part of our role for a while in agriculture, there's lots of potential for digital tools to help enable traceability, but again, potentially expose risks in the supply chain. And then lastly, of course, sort of the broader food, energy, water security issues of the day, and how digital tools are going to help us be more efficient with our resources, but also more equitable with our distribution. And so that's what led me after my fellowship to apply for this job with IoT for Ag, again, the Internet of Things for precision agriculture. I honestly had very little insight on the technical side of what kinds of technologies the center was working on, but I've learned a ton about the potential for sensors and biodegradable batteries and ground and air robotics and digital communication systems to all enable us to really monitor a whole of farm system and do so in a sustainable way that's going to help us be much more precise with our resources. And so I won't go through this, but my role as managing director is really to oversee the research translation from all 4 of our core universities. But we're based at the University of Pennsylvania. That's sort of our headquarters where I am. And so that's what has brought me to Pennsylvania. Sorry, we're getting the Zoom sign out. And so as you might have guessed by now, I'm not the kind of person that likes to just wear one hat or can't do multiple projects at the same time. And so in moving to Pennsylvania, I've also gotten involved in the effort to bring science policy to Harrisburg. So really excited to talk to you guys about this. Christine teased it earlier today because I've gotten to meet Christine a bit as we've started developing what we've called the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania Science and Technology Policy Fellowship, or COPA STEP. And I'd love to tell you guys about it. It does not exist yet, full disclosure, but we are hoping it will quite soon. So to orient you a little bit, why COPASEP, why here? Again, around 2016, CCST in California has existed for a while, but now quite a few other states have adopted some form of a state-level policy fellowship. So again, putting STEM, either graduates or current students in the state government to serve as advisors and also get training in science policy. And as Tara mentioned at the beginning, I was involved in co-founding the program in Virginia while I was a postdoc there, which is still running as a summer fellowship because Virginia has a part-time legislature that only meets for about 60 days of the year. And so it's important to consider that different legislatures have different needs and different ways that these fellowships look. Pennsylvania is full-time, so we are envisioning a full year fellowship. So just a little more background. Hopefully this is all fairly obvious to you guys, but of course the General Assembly here addresses a wide range of issues that have scientific elements and the benefit of having scientific advice in-house or directly. So from agriculture to energy to healthcare. So there's sort of two sides of our pitch for the COPASEP fellowship. One is that it's a great training opportunity for scientists and engineers to learn about state government processes and get training, meaningful experiential learning. But then, of course, they provide really important guidance to the state government officials, to executive agencies, or even within the General Assembly itself, and bandwidth for research. So we are hoping this fellowship, at least administratively, will be housed at Penn State. I think, in my view, I'm at Penn now, my heart is really with the land-grant university systems. I just think that their value to society is, it's part of your mission. So this is the Penn State land-grant mission statement here, and I do think that sort of the future of land-grants could include more direct science policy engagement as you seek to generate, integrate, apply, and disseminate knowledge that's valuable to society. Right? Part of doing that is more direct engagement with policymakers, we hope. And why now? I think it's actually a really important moment, an opportunity in the Pennsylvania state government to move this fellowship idea forward. With the new governor's administration, they released the budget, I think just earlier this month. And going through it, there's really a range of priorities that they've made really clear where they might benefit from some science policy guidance and would enjoy training young scientists to help do that. So check out our website at the bottom if you want to get involved, if you want to just give us some insight or ideas. We're really looking for an administrative home and have had a lot of really great conversations with folks on the Hill who are eager to host a fellow if we can get sort of all the groundwork laid on the administrative side. So we're looking forward to hopefully having that to announce relatively soon. All right, so now I'll just wrap up with a couple of my career takeaways. And I think caveat, of course, I graduated about 5 years ago with my PhD, which feels long ago to me, but it's not that long. So my career takeaways so far, just to reiterate. I can't emphasize enough, like finding your people. I was at the AAAS annual meeting earlier this month. It's the first time it's been in person for 3 years. And it was just such a whirlwind of fun to reconnect with all these people in the science policy ecosystem because they're really a type, we're a type of people that are really excited about what we do, really eager to help each other. And it's really important. We often say that doing science policy well is knowing the right people to ask. I'll emphasize what I said at the beginning is to really bring a lifelong learning perspective and humility to what you strive to do in science policy. I have reviewed a lot of applications for a lot of NSDN programs and even for some AAAS fellowships at this point. And you wouldn't be surprised how many people write their applications saying, I'm a scientist, I'm going to bring my knowledge to the policy process and I'm going to save the day. Right? And I think that the awareness that there are a lot of considerations in the process is really important. My friend Thomas Jefferson from the University of Virginia, his quote is quite important there. And then lastly, staying engaged. You're doing the right thing, of course, by being here, but I can't emphasize enough the role of just raising your hand, saying yes to things. I've found some of my best mentors by volunteering to do random student governance committees and things. So like your happy hour in DC that I had you meet every year is a great example of. Otherwise, you just have to say yes and see where that takes you. And then just to wrap up, finally, none of the work that I've talked about here has been done alone or in a vacuum. And so I would be remiss not to thank all of the wonderful friends and colleagues who have helped with all of my work along the way. Thank you very much. Happy to take questions, and please reach out anytime. Just go to lunch.
Sorry. Just a quick question. So, like you mentioned about your passion for precision livestock farming, how open have you found like farmers to be like to actually integrate these systems and their actual ability to do so? Because I know it's also like a financial issue. So like, are there barriers that kind of you guys help to overcome, like grant things like that they can apply for?
That is a great question, and I will add the caveat that IoT for Ag is focused on like fruits, vegetables, row crops, and orchards, and we've excluded animal agriculture just for the sake of scope. But you're exactly right that the cost is often cited as the largest barrier, but I think there's also the barrier of like sort of trust in technology in a way, you know, as farmers, right? You're working under the small margins. And so often we're finding that farmers aren't going to adopt any technology until they're really convinced it's going to be reliable and consistent on a regular basis. And so for really new, novel things, it's going to take us a while to prove that. And to also find like sort of trusted stewards of that information within the agriculture community. So something we are trying to do is partner more with extension agents, ag agents associated with our core universities as the sort of trusted liaisons who can start doing that for us. It's a great question. Yeah.
I was kind of curious about the other side. Like you mentioned, how as scientists, we can implement our knowledge, we can tell them the scientific perspective, but to be an impactful in a science policy role, what does it take for a scientist to understand the law or the policy side? Do we have to be well versed with all the laws? Do we need to read all the policy documents? What do we need to do as scientists to understand their perspective?
I would not recommend trying to read all the laws. It's definitely ambitious. But no, that's a good question too. I think that's part of what a lot of the scientific training with NSBN and other organizations is going to help you get into, because it is a whole different world of jargon. The acronyms in policy are really out of control. So figuring out how to get practice and exposure to those things so you can speak their language is very important. It's a really good point. It's something that I recommend any sort of experiential learning internship. Writing a policy memo, people require you to read policy documents. So that's a great way to do it. But then I'll also emphasize again the value of networks and making friends and colleagues with policy professionals who you can call on, so that you aren't expected to have every single type of expertise that you're going to need to work in science policy, because it's a lot and everything's intersecting. Oh, yeah.
Gosh, so I had a conversation with Tommy, who you're working with by the fellowship, probably a couple of years ago, you know, and he was just kind of thinking of it. I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit how it went from like the ideation stage to where it is now.
Sure. So the question is about sort of the ideation of the COFA-STEP Fellowship, which Toby, one of the former Penn State science policy leaders, as I understand it, is on our team. And I think it's been a long time coming. So people know Deborah Stein. She's in Pittsburgh and is an OSTP alumni and is very established in the science policy world, based in Pittsburgh, and almost got a fellowship started at Carnegie Mellon, as I understand it, maybe 10 years ago, maybe even a little more recently than that. But the funding didn't quite work out. And with all of these states starting fellowships, to be honest, the competition for funding is quite fierce, and everyone's having to get a little creative about where you sort of all approaching the same foundations over and over again. And so I think since then, Debbie sort of passed the baton to the sort of coalition that I had just joined, but that is the Penn State science policy representatives. Tony is now a fellow in Missouri. And then the Penn group, where the students where I'm at now. And so they knew I had been involved with the Virginia fellowships, and they welcomed me in as sort of a staff member representative now. And so, over the last 2 years, they've had, and now I've had more than, I want to say like 40, 45 conversations with legislators, with legislative staff, with executive agencies, just generally trying to build interest and enthusiasm. And I think that's been highly successful. There's a ton of interest in having the fellowship program exist. The challenge has been finding that administrative logistical post. So we consider starting our entirely own nonprofit like CCST is. We've tried to be housed in existing nonprofits that just don't have the bandwidth to run a fellowship program. We've got offers from people in the General Assembly that are like, I'll just hire a fellow outright. I'll just hire them as an employee of my office. And that would be great too, but then we want to be able to provide training for them, have some part-time staff. And so the journey has been sort of long, and we've talked to a few different places in Penn State now, but are hoping that there's going to be sort of a right fit for this administrative home, at least temporarily. Some like Missouri, for example, started out within a university and then has now spun out into its own nonprofit, so it could be sort of an incubation approach.
My question is a little bit more about career trajectory. And I've observed that a lot of folks in science policy have very twisty, turny career trajectories. So I guess in your experience, how malleable do you have to be to be willing to follow the opportunities as opposed to, following a specific passion? And I guess how has that impacted your career? And then also how is rejection fit into that? Because science policy is competitive. So I was just wondering if you could talk about that a little bit.
Yes, all very good questions. And I mean, there are definitely folks who, if you can go get a job at the FDA and that's the exact kind of science policy you want to do, people do definitely have much more straightforward trajectories in science policy if you find the right thing and you really love doing it. I would say that I would classify myself less as malleable and more as just indecisive. That I keep doing things and I think the grass is greener and I'm just still trying to figure out where in this science to policy spectrum I really feel like I can be most effective and useful. And so I do think it's fairly common to have this bouncing around trajectory, especially if you get into the more political side and you might even be rotating in and out with administrations, right? A lot of NSP and advisory board members are like that maybe they're with the Office of Science and Tech Policy for one administration, and then they sort of bounce out to the private sector or the nonprofit sector or some other executive agency if the administration changes. And so I think that sort of malleability and ability to both talk about your skills in a translational way, but that if you actually translate your skills to a new goal is definitely important to sort of hone and to think about what common threads you are going to keep through your career, right? For me, that's really been the food and agriculture connection and sustainability in that sector that I've tried to keep consistent. So I really have a story to tell in because it is what I'm passionate about. And on rejection, yes, there's a lot. I assume there will keep being a lot because it is definitely a competitive field, which is a good thing, right? That means that when you do get the fellowship or the position, right, you can feel really confident that, well, you're the right person for the role and you've earned it. So definitely get comfortable with some rejection. Lots of people have to apply to the fellowship programs more than once before you get it. That's not uncommon. So stick with it and keep pursuing the things that you're interested in. And I'm more than happy to advise people on fellowship applications and stuff. I love to mentor people on their memos and personal statements in the interview process. So please reach out to me if you're going through it or thinking about it.
Kind of in regards to your work with things for ag, how have you found working with kind of like special interest groups? So like the PA fruit and vegetable growers, or just even like the horticulture society or like arboriculturists. how has working with those groups kind of helped bridge the gap between the farmers who you want to get the technology to and maybe like they're unease with that technology to as like an intermediary who is already well versed with what the practices are and has those relationships already with those individual farmers?
Yes, so the question is about commodity groups and kind of industry reps, and this really is essential. So there's two really important advisory boards that we have with IoT for Ag. One is the Industry and Practitioner Advisory Board. Those folks pay dues depending on the size of their company. They get benefits like early access to the IP we're creating as a center, but then we get the benefit of their review and critique of all of our research. We have more than 30 research projects on an annual basis. So that's really crucial, and those relationships are, different companies have different amounts of bandwidth, and some of them have someone who's a really good fit to advise us, and some just kind of want to be in the loop and pay their dues and be superficially involved. So the ones that are really involved, organizations like John Deere, Corteva, are really a great asset, and they hire interns from our pool of students and postdocs that helps kind of bring the knowledge of what the industry needs are back to the center. So that is a really important pipeline that the NSF encourages us to build, and that we know is really important to the translation of the tech. And then unique to our center, we've also created this Ag Systems Advisory Board to work with the exact groups you're talking about, that they don't really care about our actual intellectual property and getting commercialization rights, but they are great advisors, especially for example, we've got a project on precision detection of toxins in peanuts. And so the Peanut Commodity Board is part of our Ag Systems group. They work really closely with those researchers and are exactly what you're saying. They're liaisons to growers. They provide insight on if the research is headed in the wrong direction or is making a wrong assumption. So those are crucial, and we're always trying to do more and use those folks more effectively. I think the challenge is bandwidth on both sides for the researchers and for the industry members, but then also ensuring that both parties have the right training to communicate to each other effectively on a regular basis. And that's part of my job that I really enjoy, is helping people do that. The state governments and the Departments of Ag are also part of our advisory groups there too. I want to keep us from lunch, but please come find me if you have any other questions. I'm really more than happy to chat.
We just want to throw out one thing. If you are a Science Policy Society member, the first 10 people to sign up for an NSPN membership do get that reimbursed. I'm not sure how many we've reimbursed so far. All right, so we've got about 50% left. So it is a $20 fee. There's so many great resources there. I've, gotten to participate in workshops from, Science Policy 101 to Harvard negotiations and research jobs. So there's just, a wealth of opportunity within NSPN, and I encourage all of you to check it out. And then lunch is going to be held in the same room where we've had the coffee. And so I look forward to seeing all of your smiling faces over there. Thank you.
Also, the lunch, there's you can grab it there, but you might want to eat it here. I feel like there's not as many tables over there, so I expect it's only free over here.